mainly study Helheim Glacier, and that's in southeast Greenland. I study a few other glaciers on the west coast of Greenland, but Helheim Glacier has been my main focus of study for 4 years now. I know, and Aurora is in similar space too, at least for her PhD.
Yeah, for my PhD, I study the fjord and the ocean water that Helheim Glacier sits in, and so that's really fun. That Michael really focuses on the ice specifically, and how it's moving and how it's changing, and I do some of that as well. But then I'm also looking at where that ice meltwater is going in the fjord, Surmalik Fjord, in where Helheim Glacier, where it runs into. So it's really this connection between the ocean and the ice. But I've also studied glaciers in Alaska, where I'm from. Galcana Glacier, which is in the US, we have USGS benchmark glaciers that have really defined sort of the changes that glaciers have experienced for the last more than 50 years now, well, 70 years. And so that's a really special glacier. And there's an old hut on it from like the 1950s that has all these sort of names of scientists that have been up there, and also photographers and mountaineers. And then the Juneau ice field in Alaska as well, which is the largest ice field in Alaska and has lots of different glaciers, some that end in the ocean, some that end on land, and is a really special place to a lot of people because it hosts the Juneau Ice Field Research Program every summer.
I mean, I started in glaciology in 2019, and then in 2020, COVID hit, so it was hard to see. And for Helheim Glacier specifically, we should describe it. It's a really big glacier. It's like 6 kilometers wide and maybe 700-800 meters thick at the end of it, the terminus. But so in my own eyes, I've seen Helheim twice, and it's really hard to tell at these scales, like these changes, because it's just there's everything's so large. But from the data I look at, because I study how I use this tool called terrestrial laser scanners, and it's just a way to like map the surface elevation like really accurately, and just through that you can see lots of changes in the elevation just from when we first put it out in 2015 to now, like several, like in some areas 100 meters less thick than within that 8-year span, 7-8 year span. So for my own eyes, no, but through the data, yes. And Aurora, I'm curious about your response.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about just how big
Mhm.
Helheim Glacier is, and yeah, in these sort of like just in several years, it can be hard to see changes because it's so massive. Like it's just otherworldly. It's like being on another planet when you're around Helheim. But I've been going to Galcana Glacier in Alaska. It's in interior Alaska, and it's a much smaller glacier, so a really different scale. And I started studying that glacier, like my very first research project, like as an undergraduate. And then I go back to that glacier regularly with students, with high school students. And so it's been a place that I've gotten to see for over a decade now. And so at that time scale, over 10 years, you see a lot of changes. And it's almost like the whole front of Galcanic Glacier has like deflated like a balloon, like a sad balloon after 3 days after a party. A lot more, there are more rocks where there used to be ice. There's a lot more like exposed land. And the ice is a lot dirtier because there's more exposed land.
I mean, I've seen a fair bit of glaciers, and I mean I'm super attached to Helheim because I've studied it for so long now, and and even I mean when I even look at the data like I'm talking about, there is like a feel I see, like I mean I have an experience when I see like a deflation essentially of ice over time, and especially such large scales. It's to me it's pretty like evocative, like wow, like it's not coming from like a science perspective, just like you don't, it's pretty clear to tell like 100 meters is a large number, and I don't really think about it like mathematically, or like I don't think about like the physical processes of glaciers at that point. I'm just like wow, like this is changing really fast and such a you know kind of short time scale, compared to a feature that's existed for thousands, hundreds of like thousands of years. To see something like that, I mean, I feel quite emotional when I see the data like that, and even just seeing glaciers in person too. There's such a strong, like awe-inspiring feeling of just like the beauty and everything of it that I just love too.
I really love that question, Sarah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because it's not something that we talk about enough.
Hmm.
And I think it's really true that people do feel attached to the
Hmm.
place that they study, and um, feel a sense of connection to it. Even folks that do remote sensing and modeling and maybe don't ever do field work, I think there's still a sense of knowing a place. Um, that is, and that's really special. I think that's like what drives you, at least for me, like that's what drives me to do work, is to feel like I am connecting with a place. Um, yeah, with Galcana, it definitely feels um, emotional every time I go, both from how much it's changing, and because of the groups of students that I get to bring to that place, and the experiences that we have together there. And so that place has really held a lot of special experiences, and that place, the glacier is a teacher, it's a classroom, and so I feel very connected to it in that way. Um, and then in Greenland, it's maybe a little bit different, because it's not, for me, because it's not my home, and I'm very cognizant that I'm a guest there, and I still do feel a sense of attachment. Um, but I think I often have complicated feelings about what does it mean that I'm, an outside scientist coming in that has this attachment and does have these feelings, and um, wanting to also honor that relationship could be even deeper and more meaningful, or could just be different to the people that live in Greenland, or live closer to the glacier. And so, not that one is better than the other, or one relationship or way of connecting to a place is better than the other, but just like being cognizant that I can learn from people that maybe do have this different relationship with the place. I would say, yeah, I also really like this question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think about the community of glaciologists, it's a really great group of people. I think what does happen, though, is there's so many different things to study, and there's so many places to study, that um, things do get a little bit siloed. And I think that that's in terms of like places. So, people that work in Greenland, we all, I would say, generally talk to each other, and that's pretty
Mhm.
open. Although maybe it's harder to talk to people that are based in Europe, versus for me, talking to people that are based in the US, but I feel like that's a pretty like open community, and we all talk and share, and people that work in Antarctica like also talk and share, and people that work in the Himalayas, I think, talk and share, but there's just like so much to study that you can't, there's not enough time to like talk to everybody doing everything. So I think it's only natural that we kind of like break off into these smaller communities of glaciologists. Um, but I also think that it's important to be cognizant to bridge those boundaries, because there's a lot that we can learn from people studying glaciers in other contexts, right? Like studying glaciers in Peru, these small tropical glaciers that are essential for drinking water for people in the Andes. That's a really different context than studying glaciers in Greenland that actually don't really relate to drinking water. But I think there's a lot to learn there by talking to each other. So yeah, maybe that's what answers your questions, that I think, we do have a really great community. It is a bit split up, mostly geographically, I would say, by what people study. But that also makes sense. I don't know, Michael, I'm curious what your take is on that.
I think you're spot on with that, Aurora. I mean, you definitely feel that in the community that there's like Greenland, like people, scientists who study Greenland, scientists who study Antarctica, scientists who study mountain glaciers around the world. And I mean, and we do relatively know of each other through either conferences, social media, just, I mean, we generally exist in the same, academic space. But at the same time, I couldn't really tell you much of what, like what people who study like glaciers in the Andes, or really the mountain glacier community, are up to too much, other than that, like we might be in the same conference room, or we follow the same people on socials. But no, I mean, but I like when Aurora alluded to, developing these connections more, especially with your drinking water analogy, because like, you would be studying the same subject, but from completely different perspectives. Some people have like stakeholders, or like there's people and that are intimately connected to these communities for like resources, right? And then there's other groups of scientists who only think of, well, I won't say only, but the main motivation is more of global scale phenomena like sea level rise and stuff too. And I think there's a big, like Aurora said, there's a big disconnect between like those perspectives.
Mhm.